Welcome, everyone. We're glad you could join us for the first session of our Document Accessibility Workshop Series. This webinar is made available by the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group. Northwest HEAT is a joint project of the Orbis Cascade Alliance and NWAC, the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium. Our mission is to advance our common goal of ensuring that digital services, systems, and resources are equitably accessible to all users. Our overarching goal is to cultivate a community of practice among faculty and staff who support digital accessibility on our campuses. To do this, we provide a series of professional development opportunities, such as this webinar, and we share best practices and resources through a collaborative knowledge base. If you'd like more information about the work of Northwest HEAT, as well as other workshops in the Document Accessibility Series, we invite you to visit northwestheat.org. You can also communicate with us through the poll that we will share at the end of this session. Before we introduce our presenter, we will take a moment to share some housekeeping details. This session includes a chat, which means that you can submit questions to our presenter throughout the session. This session includes captioning. You will find instructions on how to access captioning in our Zoom chat. This session is being recorded and the video will be shared. Our presenter for the Document Accessibility Workshop Series is Michele Joy Bromley, Manager of Digital Accessibility and Content in the Office of Information Technology at Portland State University. And now we turn it over to Michele for the presentation.
Thank you, Gloria. Let me just share my screen real quick. All righty. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Michele Joy Bromley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a digital accessibility and inclusivity specialist with over 15 years of experience in accessible digital design and remediation. I am likewise certified through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals as an accessible document specialist and a certified professional in web accessibility. I'd like to thank the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group for facilitating this opportunity to speak with you all regarding word processing accessibility basics. This session is the first in a 6-part series meant to provide you with a baseline understanding of document accessibility best practices. Speaking of accessibility, before we get started, I want to make sure that today's webinar is as accessible as possible to all attendees. Everyone intakes and processes information differently, so visual narrated presentations may not be everyone's cup of accessibility. I'm sorry for the pun. They told me not to say it. With this in mind, please feel free to access and download an HTML version of this slide deck, including all links and references, by navigating to bit.ly/word-processing-A11Y+, or by using the QR code on your screen. You're welcome to reference these materials during this morning's webinar or keep them as a takeaway reference for further study. You may have noticed that the provided link does not take you directly to the presentation slides. The addition of the plus sign to the bit.ly URL is a security measure that allows end users to verify the link destination via an intermediary bit.ly landing page before proceeding. Finally, there will be dedicated time for questions at the end of the presentation. I welcome questions throughout, regardless, and will respond when feasible. So let's get started. As the decorative digital content authoring illustration on your screen suggests, and any capacity building or training activity should begin with the what, the why, and the how. Let's get started with the what. Word processing. Why are we starting here? Well, document accessibility, sometimes referred to as non-HTML accessibility more broadly, is a broad category of accessible digital design that typically encompasses electronic documents, presentation slides, portable document files, and more. We start with word processing because this is where most of us began our own digital content authoring journey. This is level one. This is where each of us learned to write our first essay or create our first flyer. Any WordPerfect or WoodStar users here today? I got my content authoring start with WordPerfect myself. Regardless of the program in which you learned to type, format, and edit electronic documents, I doubt anyone explained the import of some of those built-in formatting tools and macros. No one explained them to me. I was a seasoned and practiced digital content author before I learned how much I needed to relearn. So why? Why make the effort to reevaluate the way that I author electronic documents? Why not focus on HTML? Much more accessible option. How much do we really care about document accessibility when we have websites and learning management systems to consider? The answer is that electronic documents aren't going away. If anything, our websites, learning management systems, and even social media have all become vessels to share electronic files with end users. And in higher education, the vast majority of those electronic files are documents. Anyone have a guess as to how many electronic documents have been stored and shared on your website? It's a rhetorical question. You don't need to share. Or through your learning management system. Ours number in the millions. Maximized accessibility and inclusivity impact for our end users begins with document accessibility, because not only will it impact the thousands and often millions of documents we share with colleagues, students, and members of the community, it will likewise provide us with a really solid foundation for web and HTML accessibility. The principles you learn here will be almost entirely transferable to the work you do with all kinds of digital content. And finally, the how. Capacity building, folks. This is where it's at. I won't auditorily describe purely decorative images in my presentation, but I will describe the one I included here. We're talking about word processing accessibility basics today, so I included an illustration of a person lifting weights with stylized Google Docs and Microsoft Word kettlebells on the floor beside them. It's a little silly, but my intention here is to point out that most of us have already been lifting metaphoric Google Docs and Microsoft Word hand weights for several years, if not decades. When we talk about building capacity in the context of these tools, it's important to understand that you're not scrapping everything you know to learn entirely new digital content authoring methods. You're simply learning to do the things you've already been doing, just a bit differently. You're leveling up. And ultimately, it's going to make you a much stronger and well-practiced digital content author in general. So let's get started. Let's lift some digital accessibility weights and talk style. What do I mean by style? With any electronic document, you have two major areas of design focus: style and structure. And most of the time when folks get started with document accessibility, they're focused entirely on structure. How do I ensure that my electronic documents are keyboard accessible? How do I make sure that folks can engage with them while using screen reading or speech recognition technologies? Accessible structure is critical and absolutely mitigates some of the most serious accessibility barriers. But before we validate our structural decisions, we typically make some introductory style decisions that have a substantial impact on visual learners and learners with cognitive disabilities. So let's kick it off with typography. 13.9% of US adults have a cognitive disability that involves serious difficulty concentrating. 5.5% have a vision disability characterized by blindness or at minimum serious difficulty seeing. Typography matters. We'll dig into overarching readability here in a bit, but for now, let's talk fonts. It's one of the first choices we make when creating a new electronic document. So here it is. Avoid serif fonts in favor of more readable text. For people with learning disabilities like dyslexia, fonts with clean lines and no embellishment can be easier to read. Times New Roman is an example of a serif font. It's It's a little more compact. The tails on serif lettering can make text run together for some readers. Verdana and Calibri, Arial are all examples of sans serif fonts that are a little bit cleaner. The one thing to watch out for with sans serif fonts is that you need an option that still clearly differentiates between similar characters like the capital letter I, the lowercase letter L, and the number 1. The same goes for characters like the capital letter O and the number 0. It's one of the reasons why sometimes people will choose a serif font for accessibility reasons, right? To differentiate between those similar characters. But there are some great sans serif fonts that allow for both. They allow for cleaner lines, less embellishment, while still clearly differentiating between those similar characters. Hence why Verdana is one of my favorites, and you'll see Verdana in use in most of the presentations in this series. You also want to avoid all caps outside of explained acronyms. The up-down cadence of title or sentence case can be easier for people with learning disabilities to read and follow than that kind of block-like homogeneous shape of words that have been typed in all caps. For font size, best practice is generally to use size 12-point font or larger as a minimum. It's tempting to use smaller fonts in order to fit more information on a page. I'm thinking about CVs and syllabi. And while magnification software can assist in these situations, one of the primary business purposes for creating an electronic document versus an HTML resource is that it's meant to be distributed both digitally and in print. So that's why you want to be thinking about that minimum size. And we'll talk about fonts again when we talk about presentations. Color. The rules regarding color are very simple. Never use color alone to convey meaning, and ensure appropriate color contrast between background and foreground text. To accessibly differentiate between elements that you might typically identify with color, you can use headings, accessible tables, lists, and other structural tools. Color can still absolutely be used decoratively or to supplement, but it should never be used alone to convey meaning. One of the most common ways in which color is used inappropriately is for content creators to indicate a link using color alone without another distinguishing feature like underlining. Ensuring solid color contrast is pretty straightforward. If you don't have access to the original red, green, blue, or hex key, in other words, that unique identifier for a given color, you can use any one of several color dropper tools online to determine that information. And then you simply input associated hex keys into a color contrast checker like the Web Accessibility in Mind or WebAIM contrast checker at webaim.org/resources/contrast checker. There you'll be able to tell if you have a contrast issue between your font and background. So we're actually going to take a quick look, and you'll see me switching back and forth a couple of times between the presentation and documents when there's something I want to make sure that I'm able to show y'all. So let's go ahead and take a look at.
While you are transitioning, sorry, I realized I didn't know if you wanted questions at the end or as we go. There was just a question related to typography in the chat.
Let's do it.
Okay, it was just a question about the new automatic, it looks like it might be the new default Microsoft font, Aptos. Sagan's asking what you think of that font.
You know, I haven't checked it out, but we are going to hop over in a Microsoft Word document at a couple points during the presentation. So we could absolutely try out that font and see what it looks like. I will say one of the things that I do to test the relative accessibility or inclusivity of a font is I'll grab any sans serif font, you know, one of those nice clean ones without the tails or embellishments, and I'm going to type my similar characters. I'm going to type a sentence. I should come up with a practice sentence that includes all of them, but the capital letter I, the lowercase letter L, the number 1, the number 0, capital letter O, and type them all out. And there's definitely some sans serif fonts that when you type those out, they pretty much look the exact same. Maybe the lowercase letter L and the capital I, like one is taller by the other one by like 1/2 of a millimeter, but that is not visually accessible or inclusive in terms of differentiating between those characters. Alrighty, so let's see. One of the things that folks will sometimes do, let's say when they're generating a resume, for example. Let's do a drawing in here. I want to have like a pop of color at the top in my heading. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and you know what? It's a pretty blue. I could go for that. I am going to go ahead and go for my blue with no outline. Okay. So then, and actually it might be better to do this example in Microsoft Word, come to think of it, because that way we can go ahead and take a look at that font while we're in there. Apologies for skipping between something here, but let's go ahead and use a shape. Oh, hey, a similar blue. Very interesting. All right. So I'm going to pop this on here and I am going to send it to the back because I want to be able to type. This is going to be my brand new resume. I'm going to highlight my experience working for Safari Sam's Fun Center. Let's go send behind text. There we go. Spelled my name wrong. That was actually my first job in high school. So I'm going to make this text a little bit bigger. That is very big. Okay. I typed my name, Michele Joy Bromley. I'm actually going to go ahead and take a look at that font. Can someone remind me what it was?
It was Aptos. It sounded like it's the new default according to Sagan.
I may not have access to it because I may be an older version of Microsoft Word. But again, I would just suggest using that method of testing out similar characters. Sometimes I'll just copy and paste the entire alphabet and all major numbers as unformatted text and check them out and just see the whole picture. But in terms of color contrast, I'm right here in my document and I want to get this background color. Is this black? I have Michele Joy Bromley typed in black text. Is that an appropriate color contrast with the blue? Let me double check. So I'm right clicking on the shape and I'm going to format shape. And I'm going to go ahead and go to fill and I'm checking out the color. What's awesome about Google Docs and Microsoft Word is they make it very easy to check for the RGB or the red, green, blue key or the hex key. Most color contrast checkers use hex keys. So I'm going to capture this hex key. This blue in the background is 4472C4. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it. And then I'm going to go to my color contrast checker. And there's a lot of color contrast checkers out there. I like using WebAIM's accessibility contrast checker because they do a little bit of explanation of how it works. Essentially, there's a minimum contrast ratio of, I believe, 4.5 to 1 for text and background via the World Wide Web Consortium's web accessibility guidelines. Web content accessibility guidelines. So let's go ahead and pop in our hex key. And then our foreground color is black, which I could go check. I use black text a lot. So I know it's just 6 zeros. Oof. So I just typed in my foreground hex value of 6 zeros for black and my background hex value, that beautiful blue. And the contrast ratio is 4.44 to 1. Yikes. Probably not a good idea. What's awesome about the WebAIM color contrast checker is that they actually let you adjust instead of experimenting back and forth with lots of different colors, if I were really attached to this blue and I thought, you know, this blue is just it's going to make me pop for hiring managers. So I can adjust the contrast ratio to something really good. This is like a 9.02 to 1. I like it. I'm going to grab that hex value and I am going to go back to my Microsoft Word document and I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Now I have a nice light blue with really good contrast for my name. Alrighty. Okay. You also want to never trust a third party's claim that a given combination of colors is ideal or accessible. For a lot of people and really most vendors, accessibility still means availability, approachability. It's online, so it's accessible, right? Validation is critical for any digital content you design or modify. So if you're creating resources, a flyer for a given organization, and you're looking at their color palette, make sure that you test the color contrast to be sure, because a lot of the design companies that organizations will contract out to develop that sort of style guide and color palette may think that they know what accessible colors mean, and they may not. Speaking of WebAIM, I like to use their breakdown for readability as a starting point for cognitive accessibility in any digital environment. Alice, I saw you pop up. Is there a question that in the chat?
There are a couple. I think we may be able to answer some of them without, but if you want me to ask them, I can. Just not sure how much time you have.
Yeah, I mean, if it's to do specifically with a topic that we're on, I would love to break and
Okay.
talk about it as we're going. And otherwise we can save them for the end.
Okay. There was one related to what the actual ratios are for contrast. I believe we can find a chart for that, but I don't know if you have that off the top of your head.
It's a minimum of 4.5 to 1 when you're talking about text and background. And if it's not text, but like a image and background or a graph and background or something like that, I believe the ratio is 3 to 1. But it's a specific calculation that's specified by the World Wide Web Consortium. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't ever calculate it myself. I use a color contrast checker to validate.
Great. Yeah, and WebAIM also has a link contrast checker within that same website as well. There was another question, I think, or a comment about color picker in WebAIM
Yeah.
working in Chrome, but not in Firefox. And I was going to go look for it, but Firefox does have a color picker add-on as well.
Yeah.
So I will see if I can populate that link in chat. And then I think that's it for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of different color droppers and color pickers out there. I actually recently had to switch extensions in my Google Chrome because the one that I had been using was no longer operable in Chrome. So I just switched to another one. But there's a lot of great color droppers out there to just get that starting RGB or hex key. And then after that, using a color contrast checker like WebAIM, or I think Paciello still has one, and I believe Snook also has a great color contrast checker. So readability, use the simplest language and phrasing appropriate for your intended audience. Get your point across with the fewest number of clear, uncomplicated words necessary. Statistics vary regarding what percentage of a given digital resource users tend to actually read, let alone comprehend, but the information you're trying to convey is substantially less effective without the use of plain speak, especially when folks are scanning for the most important information and not necessarily reading every line. You want to use columns, horizontal line separators, and empty space strategically to improve readability. Break up your content as often as possible. The irony of this slide on readability is that I believe it's actually my most text-heavy slide. Do better than I did. Use images, graphics, and diagrams to dynamically supplement text. Again, breaking up the monotony and holding your end user's attention with varying means of information sharing. Just remember to use alternative text for any contextually relevant images. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but unless it's decorative like the majority of illustrations in my presentation today, you must include a description of the content and function. And finally, this one, I know it's a given, but you must proofread for misspellings, grammar errors, and broken or outdated links. It's just good design, but it's also accessible design, since misspellings can dramatically affect usability for screen reader users, and broken links cause usability issues for everyone. Okay, let's talk structure. This is trickier stuff and arguably most critical in terms of accessibility. Most of the structural accessibility concepts we'll talk about here have a directly correlative web content accessibility guideline or success criterion. So why did we start with style? Because again, we often make style choices first, almost as soon as we open that blank Google Doc or Microsoft Word document. First, properties. This one isn't coming first because it's the most important. It's coming first because it's one of those things you're meant to consider early on in the content authoring process. You want to ensure that you include a descriptive file name and title for your electronic documents. Nonsense or abbreviated file names can make navigation and selection difficult for screen reader users. Likewise, the document title will be the first thing a screen reader user hears or a refreshable Braille display user feels, making it crucial for understanding the document's purpose. You want to also verify that the authoring, display, and proofing language is defined appropriately. Again, screen readers will respond to defined languages. Spanish content read in English by a screen reader will be substantially less accessible, if not intelligible. It's important to ensure that you define multiple languages in situations where your document contains excerpts in another language. So we're going to take a look real quick. We're going to take a look at our Google Doc first, just because language isn't something that folks necessarily think about in terms of properties. So I wanted to make sure to show where to go to do it. In a Google Doc, under File, I'm going to go to Language to specify the document language. And also while I'm up here, I am going to go ahead and title this document. This is my sample document of awesomeness. And I'm going to go ahead and put the same title in here. All righty. Let's also take a quick look, just since it's in a different spot in Microsoft Word. I'm going to go to File, Options, Language, and I'm going to specify the display language and the authoring language for both authoring and proofing. Oh, this is a lot of screens to jump between. All right. So next is headings. To help all users navigate quickly and easily, it's crucial that documents are organized with headings, and not just headings. That's absolutely crucial for navigation for visual learners, but it's crucial that they're organized with properly formatted and hierarchical heading structure. This means that headings should not simply look bigger or feature a bold, italicized, or underlined font. True headings must be selected or derived from provided style options in your content authoring tool in order to ensure that screen readers and other adaptive technologies recognize that structure. Too often, true headings are either used inappropriately or not at all. If the default heading 3 option, for example, in a given content authoring tool is visually appealing by default, it's often mistakenly used as a means of emphasizing a block of text, like a quote. Headings should be used for descriptive section titles only. And you want to ensure that the main content of every document begins with a single descriptive heading 1. This should be your first and only heading 1. It allows screen reader users to easily skip right into the document to main content by navigating via heading structure. From there, headings should appear in order, like an outline, where all subsections begin with H2 and all subsections, so to speak, begin with heading 3. The example I have on the screen has your heading 1, and then you've got 2 main sections, each are heading 2, and then within that first heading 2 section, there's a couple of subsections indicated by a heading 3. If you're worried about aesthetics because the built-in heading options in Google Docs or Microsoft Word don't fit your design motif, you can simply update the heading structure to match what you're looking for. So I want to show you an example because the biggest objection that I find from folks who are first learning to use heading structure is, ooh, I do not like the default that Google Docs put in there or Microsoft Word. So this title, Sample Document of Awesomeness, this isn't actually a title. I mean, I could make it real big, right? I could make it bold. I could maybe even center it. But that is not the heading 1. It looks like a heading, but it is not a heading. So I could go here. I could highlight Sample Document of Awesomeness with my cursor. And then in the ribbon under normal text, I open up the normal text drop down because that's going to be my style drop down. And I select heading 1. Now, I have set my Google Doc defaults to what I like them to be. So my default style in Google Docs is already going to be Verdana, and I like a size 20 heading 1. So that automatically became exactly what I wanted. It is Verdana heading 1, it is black, it is in the center. But let's say that the default was red and 72. And when I went into my heading structure and I selected it, this is what happens. It blew up to size 72 and it's red. And really, even if the contrast between the white background and the red text is acceptable, try to stay away from red, green color combinations because of users with color blindness. I just also red feels just feels like it's shouting at me, probably from my instructor days. So I am going to go ahead and make this actually what I want it to be. So manually, I'm going into Verdana. I'm going up here. It's already Verdana, but I'm going to go ahead and make it 20. I'm going to make the text black. And then I want my heading 1s to be this from now on. So I'm going to go to that style drop down again, and I'm going to go to heading 1 and say update heading 1 to match. And then I'm going to go further, and I'm going to go back to that style drop down and go to options and say save as my default styles. Because from now on, I don't want to have to mess with manually figuring out what I want to do with the font. And the great part of that is that when you set, for example, the heading 2 that you like, so sample document of awesomeness, the first section is going to be a table of contents. And I'm going to want that to be a heading 2. I've set it the way I want it. So now I'm going to go back to my style menu and say update heading 2 to match. Yes, Alice.
All right, I thought this would be a appropriate question. There's kind of question in chat about if there's only one heading 1, isn't that the title? And looks like we've got some comments of like typically yes, but I do have a question since it is one in both Google Docs and Word in follow-up to that. I saw that you set this heading 1 as the title, but within that drop down for headings, there also is a title heading in both tools. And it's a question that I've had also throughout, and just wanted to kind of bring that to attention to see why specifically heading 1 and not a title heading as your title of the title of the page.
That is a great question. You could use title, but you're right that the title is supposed to be a heading 1. And to guarantee that screen reading software, that screen reader users and refreshable braille display users are going to be able to hear that heading 1, you want to make sure it's actually coded as such. I have not tested it recently, but at least historically, a title tag is not going to be read out loud as a heading 1. And so if you're navigating, navigating by headings is something that's very common for screen reader users. And so if I'm going to start navigating with heading structure, I'm going to use my H on my keyboard and I'm jumping to that first heading. I want to make sure that my title is a heading 1 so that it's showing up for that built-in heading structure. I saw a raised hand.
Thanks, Michelle. There's actually a comment in chat too from Sagan that talks about not using the title tag because it exports as a paragraph if it gets sent to PDF, I believe. So another reason why not to use the title heading. So maybe if we give Google and Microsoft enough feedback that maybe they'll update the title tags so that it actually functions the way that it was intended to.
I raised my hand really quickly, just essentially to say that the title isn't mapped to anything. You can custom map it in Word. I'm less familiar with Google Docs, but the title is programmatically set in your document properties and should reflect the document title. And it's been like a very long running point of confusion that they always have a title tag. I can't tell you how many title tags I have changed to heading 1s throughout because of that.
One of the really important reasons to use the heading 1 and the built-in heading 2, heading 3 structure, and then of course to acclimate it to the design that's going to work best for you, of course paying attention to color contrast, because exactly the heading 1 is what's going to translate to a heading 1 for adaptive technology users. And that's a great point, translating directly to a heading 1 when you export to PDF, which we'll talk about more in the PDF accessibility section. Were there any other questions about headings before we hop into the next one? Okay. Let's look into, here we go. Great. Okay, links. You have to make sure that your links are functional, first of all, and that they make sense out of context. Do not, please do not use generic phrases like learn more, click here, read more, continue, or more information. Visible, selectable text for a given link should indicate the direction in which users will be sent on selection. This is really important because I talked about a common way that screen reader users navigate using their H key to navigate through their heading structure, which is why that heading structure is so critical to overarching navigation. Folks will also pull up their elements list or their links list or their form fields list, and they'll navigate through their links. So if they hear 7 click here's, that doesn't help them in terms of doing that quick scan to find the link that they're looking for. They'll actually have to go into the document and listen to every single one to find the one that they need. URLs as link text should also be avoided unless a URL is relevant content. So what I mean by that is that in a resource that would be distributed in print, for example, or seen on a slide in a presentation, you might use both. Please reference my link, professional LinkedIn profile, end link. And then in parentheses, linkedin.com/IN/MJ Bromley for more information. The actual descriptive link is my professional LinkedIn profile, but I've supplemented with a simplified URL in parentheses. So that's an example of when a URL might be appropriate. But most of the time, if you're talking about something that is going to be distributed predominantly electronically, you want to focus on descriptive links. Here, because we're specifically talking about document accessibility, this may be the situation where it's going to be more common to use a simplified URL in parentheses so that folks are able to go ahead and type a URL into their address bar based on a printed document. Visually, as far as links go. You just want to make sure that active links are not indicated by color alone. On this slide, I indicate my professional LinkedIn profile link with both color and an underline. This is best practice, but since the default color contrast between links and surrounding text will not always be sufficient, and also because of color blindness, regardless of the contrast that you have in there, any given user may not necessarily be able to differentiate between the link and surrounding text. So the most important thing is having a visual means other than color to indicate a selectable link. Alt or alternative text. Oh, I got a question. I just popped up the chat so that I could try to see it amongst my windows. So I saw a question about when you should provide the active link in parentheses after the descriptive link. And if a document is going to be distributed in print, right? So if I have, for example, and we'll talk about forms a little bit here in a minute, but if I have, for example, a PDF form that I've designed to be filled out in pen, but obviously also electronically. I need to design it accessibly in the background with my form fields and all of that. But I also need to make sure that it's going to be fully accessible if it's distributed and signed in print, right? And so having that URL gives the opportunity, you know, they're not going to be able to select it on the print document, so they can look at the link and then they can put it into their address bar. Alt text is critical in terms of making your illustrative or graphical content fully accessible to screen reader users. All non-decorative images require alt text. This likewise means that if there's no mechanism by which to indicate that an image is decorative, a brief alt text is typically necessary, which brings us to the how, brevity. Meaningful alt text describes the content and function of the image, not the image itself. So think about, so an example, right? If I am going to include an image on a website advertising the public workspaces at my organization, we've got like a great park area where folks can work, right? And I'm going to post a picture of somebody working in that area. Okay. So the description for that would be person sitting comfortably on a bench using a laptop in the quad. I probably don't need to say comfortably, but what if I'm using that same image on a fashion website and it's meant to demonstrate the versatility of the sundress that the person is wearing, right? I don't need to, the laptop is irrelevant. The person, you know, where they are is irrelevant. The outfit is relevant. So yes, and thank you. That was a perfect answer in the chat. If the URL link is very long, consider using a URL shortener. Absolutely. Because that's an excellent point. When you print out a document, you're distributing something. This presentation is a great example. The HTML version of the slides that I shared with y'all, if any of you navigated to them in your browser, you probably noticed pretty quickly that that bit.ly link turned into a ginormous Google Slides link that is definitely not easy to remember, if at all, and not something that I want to spell out as I'm presenting to y'all, and it's not something I want to put on my materials, which is why the link is bit.ly/word-processing-A11Y+. I think, because I'm trying to remember it. Focus on why the image is included when you're creating your alt text. If an image is also a link, adequately describe where users are going to be directed on selection, right? So the image is, let's say, the logo for your organization's awesome website. And it's literally meant to be a big old, beautiful, beveled button that takes you straight to the website. So you're going to want to say, such and such organization website. So that's a great question. Someone asked if there's security concerns with disguising links as bit.ly links. It's one of the reasons why I always include the plus sign at the end of a bit.ly link. So this was actually a recommendation of the security, from the security team at my current organization, because absolutely, folks do get a little concerned about the idea of like, okay, well, that link looks pretty, but it could take me anywhere. And while I promise you, I am not a cybersecurity criminal, you don't have to believe me. I wouldn't advise clicking on the link if I didn't put the plus sign there, but thankfully the plus sign will allow you to navigate to that intermediary landing page that says this is where you're going. Okay, I do wanna keep us going here because I want to make sure we've got time for questions. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. Lists are really a readability consideration as much as a structural one. Breaking up the monotony of text with lists is awesome and best practice. You just have to make sure they're properly formatted in order to be fully accessible. You wouldn't believe how many folks organize their content by simply typing a number or symbol rather than using the built-in list structuring options. Thankfully, improvements in Microsoft Word and Google Docs over the years have meant that like they'll kind of try to catch you, right? If you type a number and then you type something, they'll say, wait, did you want this to be a list? And start to format it as a list. More often than that, though, when lists come in and they're not formatted correctly, it's because folks have pasted lists from another location and they've neglected to ensure that the bullet or symbol they may see on the screen is more than just a Unicode symbol. And this is a pretty serious accessibility issue since adaptive technology like screen reading software must have some indication that listed items are in fact part of a list. As a sighted user, when I see the list of 4 to-do items that I've put on this slide, and let's say item 3 on that list of 4 items tells me to navigate somewhere else, I know I need to come back to the document and that list for item 4. I saw that there were 4 items. When a list is created using built-in list structuring tools, screen reading software will likewise announce to the user that they've encountered a list of 4 items, item 1, item 2. So again, then auditorily, without being able to see the list, I am going to know that I need to come back to that list for item 4 if item 3 sends me elsewhere. On this slide, I'm displaying 2 apparently identical lists. Visually, they both appear to be lists of 4 items, formatted identically with bold numbers in the decorative blue I've chosen for my presentation. But the first list uses true list structure. The second is just 4 items preceded by typed numbers. So the latter is not fully accessible to screen reader users. And I apologize because that means you will only encounter 1 accessible list on the HTML slide version of this deck. Alrighty, we are rounding out our list here. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alice.
There was a question or maybe a comment / question related to lists. I was just going to mention is I think it was Suka said that there's we also see hard returns between list items to get more spacing instead of adjusting with the spacing tool. I was just going to comment that the spacing tool, both in Google Docs and with Word, can be helpful to add spacing, because I also see that between paragraphs where someone wants to see more white space. So instead they just enter multiple times.
And screen reading software will often, depending on the individual user's settings, will often announce it as a break. So they'll hear blank, 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 which is incredibly disruptive. So yeah, and absolutely putting spaces between your bullet points, that effective use of empty space to break up your content. Another important structural consideration is the accessibility of your tables. More than anything else, it means being selective about how tables are used. Tables are often used incorrectly as a design and layout tool. Instead of using built-in columns, for example, content developers often include a table and make the grid lines transparent as a means of aesthetically distributing content in a given space. Tables must be used for organizing data only, and not as a layout or design tool. This is because tables in general can be difficult to navigate via keyboard only. Screen reading software makes navigating tables easier as long as the data is organized simply with properly formatted header rows and/or columns. And the latter does not happen by accident. You must indicate in your content authoring tool that a given table includes a header row and or column. And this really goes hand in hand with keeping your content simple and readable, but you should also avoid merged cells. Because unlike when you're designing from scratch in HTML, most document authoring tools do not provide the necessary markup to scope merged cells to the appropriate header row cell or header column cell. So you want to avoid merged cells in your tables. I'm not going to hop into Google Docs and Microsoft Word now to demo this one, but I do think it's important. We're going to hit it during the practice session. But the great thing for both Google Workspace and Microsoft Office Suite is that they have great instructions and help articles for how to apply appropriate heading structure. So finally, form fields. I'm including a big asterisk here at the top of the slide because while accessible authoring concepts for forms are a consideration in document authoring, for situations where a content author ultimately intends to generate a printable PDF form, for example, best practice is to use dedicated form authoring tools that allow for accessible design. So Google Forms, Qualtrics, HTML ideally, but if there is a clear business purpose, like the example we discussed earlier for generating a form that is both digitally fillable and printable, you want to go ahead and start in your content authoring software, knowing there's a lot more things you need to do in your PDF editing software to get you across the finish line. To clearly identify and label all form fields, including which form fields are required, likewise not making a form field required if it's not necessary, and ensuring that all directions and cues are accessible and appropriately adjacent. And there will absolutely be more to come in this series regarding how to ensure the accessibility of PDF forms. So quick recap, we covered 10 total design accessibility concepts for word processing in terms of style, typography, color, and readability. In terms of structure, we've got properties, headings, links, alt text, lists, tables, and form fields. It's a lot, so if you have to narrow it to get started, focus on the three with quite possibly the biggest impact: headings, links, and alt text. In fact, welcome to the lightning TED Talk portion of this morning's session. If you take only 3 things with you today, take headings, links, and alternative text. You want to prioritize making your documents navigable, making your links descriptive and actionable, and making your contextually relevant images mean something to all end users. Okay, that is all I have for you today. We did answer a lot of questions throughout, but if there's any remaining questions, we've got a few minutes.
Yes, I think we have 3 unanswered questions, but I know that Marianne just pushed out the poll and I think people are starting to fill it out. But if you haven't yet, please jump into that poll that just got sent to everybody. Just a couple, it'll take you seconds to complete, just to give us some feedback on the today's session and then our subsequent sessions, and then any other feedback you have to share. As you are doing that, we got a couple questions that hadn't been answered yet. I will just start with our earliest ones. Sagan was asking if it's possible to mark sections of text as a specific language, or are multiple languages set at the whole document level? And Daniel, I believe, also had shared a resource that possibly can help, but not sure if you have additional context or answers for that.
I know how to tag that appropriately in PDF, but it's not actually something that I've looked into tagging in documents. Google Docs and Microsoft Word documents that I create originally, I typically haven't included multiple languages. And I do know how to tag it appropriately in PDF, but I don't actually know the answer to the question if you can tag multiple languages within the content authoring tool. But
No.
check that out before our practice session in 2 weeks.
Thanks. I think the resource that Danielle, I hadn't looked at it yet, but I have saved it. And what we may do, since it looks like there were so many resources shared in chat, maybe we can curate a list, share it back out of resources that were shared from our participants. And thank you to all of our participants for helping to answer questions. There were lots of addressed questions from our participants. There was a second question about from Marie saying that over 50% of our students are accessing Canvas courses via the Canvas student app. What testing for mobile do you recommend? And maybe some of our audience members may also be able to.
Testing the Canvas LMS itself via mobile? Or the
If that's
documents that are
on
uploaded?
site.
Yeah.
Within
go
Canvas,
ahead.
there are accessibility checkers, I know, but I think the testing for mobile is what her question is asking.
Oh,
That is a great, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Marie from the Office of Academic Innovation, and we do have an internal accessibility working group that I work with Dr. Kari Goin. So, I mean, it is like a big question. I even presented at InstructureCon last year, and I recently received the recent mobile app data usage for our students from Instructure Rep. So this may be a whole separate journey we have to go on because, and I may have to talk to you separately, Michelle, but just I wanted everybody to know if you're working with faculty, the students just go ahead and they downloaded the Canvas student app and they are using it regularly. So this may be a larger question, but, and I have the slides of all of the mobile app data, if anybody would like that. And I also created a Canvas course for accessibility playground that we did. And so, yeah, we have a lot of information over in OAI. So if anyone has questions, please contact us.
Yeah, I would say that questions regarding mobile accessibility testing or really any accessibility testing with adaptive technology, I would say that's probably a separate, we could do a whole series on accessible procurement best practices and mobile testing. I think in terms of this series, testing the accessibility of documents, you're probably gonna have a better experience testing, validating the accessibility of the documents you're authoring using a full operating system. And then you can absolutely test the accessibility of a given document on your mobile device using the built-in screen reading software. So for iOS, of course, VoiceOver, there's Google Talkback, there's a couple of different mobile screen reading applications that you can use to test a document. But the most important thing is really following all of those accessible design principles at the onset for your documents. In terms of learning management systems, that's also a whole separate series that we could talk about.
I know.
Because yeah, documents kind of a different, similar but different set of considerations than testing the accessibility of a software, for example.
Thanks,
Okay.
Michelle. And I know there's others that probably do have comments, but we are at closing in on our 8 o'clock. So I'm just going to put up our closing slide and remind everyone, if you haven't signed up for it, sign up for our session 2, word processing accessibility in practice. So we'll go beyond what Michelle is sharing conceptually and actually have a more hands-on session so that you folks can dive in into word processing accessibility. And I know there was one outstanding question. We're at 8 o'clock, so I'm just going to summarize very quickly. Someone was asking about the images, if they have a really detailed description, maybe it's an annotated image or whatnot. If they already have the indicated steps or the the description of the image or what it's trying to indicate. We bounced around some ideas of like, rather than having all of that text in the alt text, is maybe inserting a figure so that you can reference it and say this paragraph relates to this image, or this is what I'm conveying, and or being able to include a caption, for example, that describes the image so that they know that the text is tied to the image.
Well, how about this, since I know we're at 11 a.m., how about at the word processing accessibility practice session in 2 weeks? Let's go ahead and we'll make it a hard one. I'll bring a document that has a big old graph in it, just something really ugly, maybe with some really bad color contrast too. And we can talk about long descriptions, because there are absolutely best practices for alt text versus long description.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Michelle, and have a great day, everyone. We'll see you at the next session.